Ugh. Can't you see you're not making Christianity better? You're just making rock and roll worse.
Why does so much Christian media seem lifeless or devoid of creativity or originality? On a recent video, someone commented and asked why so much Christian media is like plagiarized or copied or stolen, even if it's just the forms, right? Why do Christians try to copy or emulate secular or popular music, movies, art, things like that? And they came in a little hot, and I shot right back, which wasn't cool. And I actually got to chat with them a little back and forth in that comments section. They're pretty chill. So the question is reasonable, and I want to try to talk about it for a minute because I'm a pastor, and an educator, and an author, and a musician, and a preacher. I do art things in Jesus space. So let's talk about it a little bit. So first, let's talk about why so much church media is just kind of bad. And it is. Don't try to defend it. A lot of it's terrible. A lot of it's artificial. These big media companies are targeting Christians as a consumer group. And so they produce music and film. So a lot of it doesn't come from a place of creativity or originality. Many of these Christian bands, they're sort of, you see them for an album or two, or they go on tour and they disappear, they have a one-hit wonder, things like that. A lot of those bands are called in to do the music. It's been written by the company or they've hired songwriters, but it's not the artist's song that they're making. They were just sort of recruited and auditioned and put into a band. In the early 2000s, they even made like a Making the Band TV show out of it, which was another cheap imitation of something that was kind of interesting on MTV. There's also this copycat game that the like Christian bookstores and Christian music peddlers know they have to play. I remember being a kid and visiting a Lifeway Christian store, and those are gone. But they had this big kiosk with all their CDs in. You could put the headphones on, push the button, and listen to it. But it had this chart. It's like, if you like Eminem, try John Rubin. What is he dibbity doing? You like Blink-182? Nah, dog. Try Reliant K. Avril Lavigne? No way. We got Barlow Girl. Dave Matthews Band? How about Dave Crowder Band? Nirvana? Ew. Try Switchfoot. So they're playing on this idea that's like, kids like gross secular stuff, and their parents and grandparents want to get them into church. Let's just bait them in with things that they already like. But it doesn't really work that way, and that's not how music or taste or creativity or human souls work. So why is so much Christian media weak? It's because it's a product rather than a production from someone's soul, someone's heart, someone's mind, someone's creativity. When that flows out of someone, when that's being produced, birthed, created, it's beautiful. But when the corporation says, hey, kids like this, this, and this, let's take that, wrap it up, and stick a sermon at the end of it, it's not good. Because it's not from that internal spark. But the church is supposed to be different, right? You've probably heard the phrase, in the world but not of the world. That's not in the Bible. I think it's a paraphrase of Romans 12, where it says, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed. We're supposed to be becoming more like Jesus, not more like the culture. And the church is holy, right? Holy means set apart. It means unique. It means different. We're supposed to be separate, right? That's one of the ideas. We shouldn't be chasing culture. We shouldn't be seeking fame. We shouldn't be invested in the profane. I've heard that phrase. We shouldn't be involved in anything that resembles evil. I've heard that one talking about drums. How stupid is that? Side note, the drums thing, it's totally racism. So why don't we make our own things? Why does some of our best music, it sounds like I'm talking like we're on teams. Why does some of the best Christian music out there sound like it could be played on a secular radio station? Why do our books, like our fiction, why does it sound so much like normal fiction? Why do our movies try to be action movies or scary movies or romances? Well, I think when it's good, right, because we talked about this a second ago, a movie studio says, we need to make a low-budget movie so that because we're not going to make a ton of money, we need a wide margin, so let's make a cheap movie. What's cheap to make? Scary movies, terror, horror, that's cheap. We can do a boogeyman thing. People love that stuff. They'll come out for that, especially if it's a Christian horror film. You don't see those. Let's make one of those. Rather than an artist saying, I have this vision of this story. So it can be derivative and weak and lacking when it's a production rather than something that is produced from the heart. So why does Switchfoot, why is their music good, right? For those of us millennials, Switchfoot's still good. I like Switchfoot. They're making their music. They started in high school. It's music that comes from who they are, what they like, what their experiences are. And alt-rock is what they listen to. That's the language of their heart, and they are expressing themselves through a language, a medium that they already have. Are they allowed to do that? Should the church? My eyebrows are doing a lot of work in this video, and I just want to recognize. Well, guess what? The Bible does. If you're familiar with the writings of Paul, you would notice that he's something of a philosopher and something of a poet. And if you're familiar with a lot of classical literature, when you read Paul, you'll recognize that he lifts and quotes other pagan philosophers and poets. How cool is that? Also, in the book of Jude, Jude does it too. Jude is one of the brothers, half-brothers, however you want to think about it, of Jesus. Jesus had 4 brothers. One of them is named Jude, or Judah, and he writes a letter. He was a teacher and like a traveling missionary that came, who didn't believe in Jesus, because his brother is not the Messiah. That's stupid. But then he meets a resurrected Jesus, and he's like, oh, oops, and gives his life to this mission of spreading the church. And so he wants, he's Jewish, of course, and his audience is Jewish. And he wants them to understand the epicness of their situation. And so he uses a lot of the Bible. He quotes the Bible a bunch in his little letter, which is 1 chapter. But he also quotes other well-known Jewish literary works that are in their culture, in their mind, in their imagination, in their language. So I think that means we're allowed to do it too. And there's really cheesy ways to do it, and there's clever ways too. But like, you see it a lot in youth ministry and in kind of hip churches. They'll use Star Wars or Batman or Lord of the Rings to talk about the gospel. But I think there's also probably creative ways to do it that aren't cheesy. Like, I've got a sermon out there where I talk about the hero's journey, right? You're familiar with that. Everyone knows about that. But I do the hero's journey and show how Peter goes on a hero's journey. And I'm like, so right here, Luke gets the lightsaber. Right here, Harry Potter learns this. Here, the mentor dies. You know, like, I use these stories that everyone already has in their hearts and their minds to help them connect with the story that Jesus is telling through the person of Peter. Okay, I can hear someone from my camp criticizing this, saying, avoid even the appearance of evil. Which, first, that's not what that means. 2, the culture, art, music, cinema isn't evil. It can do evil things. You know, like, you can have the whole Tool argument, but it's not de facto bad. Paul quotes pagans when they tell the truth. Jude quotes other works of literature when they are beautiful and useful. So here's the charge, right? Whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is beautiful, whatever is just, whatever is bringing about community. These things are good. These things, and I just quickly Googled to make sure that I was quoting from Philippians. That is what was in my head. Philippians 4:8 has this virtue list of things that the Christian should meditate on, which means if something is good, true, pure, beautiful, brings about justice, brings about restoration, then it already belongs to God. It's a gift that the world has received. And so when someone else uses it, whether they be Christian or not, if you're producing something beautiful, you're producing something good for the world. And I believe Jesus likes good music and good theater and good literature and good cinema. So that last video was basically complete. Like, those are all the thoughts, but I had another thought. So this is kind of a part 2, but you also don't need part 1. Wisdom. I'm going to talk about wisdom. So the question is, why don't Christians have supernatural creativity, divine inspiration, that sort of thing, right? Why is Christian media usually derivative and copying of the culture? Last video I talked about how good art is good art, and Jesus likes good art, and what flows out of us is from what's around us, things like that, showing even the Bible does it. But I want to talk about wisdom. There's this idea in the Old Testament. It's not as much in the New Testament, but it's all over the Old Testament. Specifically the book of Proverbs, which is all about wisdom. And there's a specific, because there's a couple different words that mean wisdom-y things, but the word that you normally see translated to wisdom is chokmah. And chokmah is a very specific kind of wisdom. It's what's being used, what is being utilized, the tool of creation for artists, for poets, for musicians, for skilled labor when they build the temple and the tabernacle, the places where God will live. And they're beautiful, they're ornate. Those workers are said to be using chokmah. Chokmah isn't just wisdom, it's God's wisdom. But beyond that, it's actually a part of God. It's one of God's attributes. Proverbs even personifies it into Lady Wisdom, that this part of God that brings about new things, that creates beauty and discerns truth and speaks truth and seeks and produces justice, the part of God that's obsessed with beauty and goodness, that's Lady Wisdom, that chokmah is this part of God. And so from the Old Testament, from the Bible's perspective, anytime anyone does something good, true, just, beautiful, makes the world better, builds community, makes good, real art, they have partnered with God in doing that. And so all inspiration becomes divine inspiration. All creativity is supernatural. All of it is a gift from God that the creatives tap into. They connect with this thing. I don't want to it's not the muse. God doesn't force anyone to create art. God isn't writing people's songs, but the human spirit connects to the chokmah, and the chokmah, the wisdom of God, empowers human beings to produce things that are good, true, beautiful, produce justice, produce community, make the world better. So, where does art come from? Where does inspiration come from? Where does creativity come from? It's when the human soul connects with the wisdom of God that is roaming about, that just sort of exists around us. And it's the same chokmah that Proverbs tells us that God used to create the universe. The cosmos were crafted as a piece of art, as a work of art, as a work of creativity, as a work of love. So anytime we do that, we're partnering with God in the work of creation. And I think that's really beautiful. I think that's good news. So that's part 2 of my answer. I hope it wasn't too theologically obnoxious. And I kind of got to preaching, and I don't always intend to do that, but I am a preacher, so sorry.